Kashyap sir.
Namaste.
Welcome to Prana Stories.
Thank you very much. I've been watching some of your shows. Watched the podcast with Arjun Bharadwaj and Hari Ravi Kumar and VB Aarti and few others. It's been very interesting. I'm extremely happy with the work that Prana Stories has been doing and you have been doing. And I find it my privilege to be here with you speaking today.
Thank you so much. You already you are introducing Prana Stories more than I introduce you. So again, thank you so much for all the kind words. So you are a practicing lawyer, and then you kind of handle commercial and civil cases. That's
Yeah.
what I know of that.
Yeah.
And also the property related cases, and you have been doing that from around 16 years. That's what it is. And you are the one who took interest in reading about Dharmashastras, and created a study circle around that, and then with friends, right? That's what you.
Yeah, actually, Shatabdani, Dr. R. Ganesh, and some of my 5-6 other friends, we studied under his guidance. P.V. Kane's History of Dharmashastra. We studied for around 2.5 to 3 years. And of course, with Dr. Ganesh's guidance, we were able to make an in-depth study on the P.V. Kane's Dharmashastra.
Okay.
And that interested me to read a lot of other Dharmashastras also, like Yagnavalkya Smriti, Kautilya's Arthashastra, and so on.
Okay.
So that is where my other reading comes from.
Nice. So today's topic that we are going to talk about is Dharmashastras, Indian Dharmashastras, and the Indian Constitution, right?
Yeah.
What are the similarities? Are there any differences? All these things, people may not understand what is the Dharmashastra itself first in the first place. So can we start there? What is a Dharmashastra?
Yeah, so let me start from what is Dharma to begin with before speaking on what the Dharmashastras speak about. So the word Dharma comes from the root word or dhatu called dhru, which means sustenance, to uphold, to nourish, to sustain. And there is a famous shloka of Mahabharata, Dharana Dharma Ityahuhu Dharmo Dhara iti Prajaha Yasyat Dharana Samyuktam Sadharma iti Nishchayaha, which means that that which holds together, which unites and binds together and removes the separation of unwanted things in order to elevate ourselves, to nourish ourselves. That itself is Dharma. That is the one which is holding the society together. So sustenance of life, or sustenance in particular, can be called as Dharma. Now we see Dharma in Purusharthas. So you have Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. I'll not get into...
Purushas are basically the fourfold principles of life.
Yeah. So any life that you see will have to fall on the 4 legs of Purusharthas. Again, in that, the Moksha is always called as an Apavarga. And Dharma, Artha, Kama is called as the Trivarga. So Moksha is for those who seek liberation. And the Trivarga, that is Dharma, Artha, Kama, is for the living of life of any particular individual.
More on the physical plane, if I can say.
Correct.
Yeah.
So how your life would have to be led can meaningfully can be through the principles of Purusharthas. Now, I'll not get into the detail of each of the Purusharthas because that's not the topic for today. And I think Hari Ravi Kumar in his podcast has covered quite a few of it.
Yeah, I mean, just I can remind the audience that if you want to know more about Dharma and Sanatana Dharma, the principles and the words that are being used here, like Kama, Artha, Moksha. Kama is nothing but desire. Artha is nothing but means to achieve that desire, or the material. And moksha is, like you said, liberation. So for these terms, if you want to understand anything, you can always go and see Hari Ravi Kumar sir's podcast on Sanatana Dharma.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So for each of these, there is a Shastra, there is a science. So you would see that in the Hindu way of life, everything needs to be understood and realized. There is no pushing, saying that you have to take this as the gospel truth and continue with the faith. That doesn't exist. So for us to understand what is dharma or artha or kama, there is a shastra for each of it. So you have the Dharmashastras, you have the Arthashastras, you also have the Kama Sutra, which is there. And for moksha also there is a shastra which is nothing but the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. Those are the manner in which you would be able to understand what it is. So now for Dharmashastras, we'll have to basically know that where does Dharmashastra even come in under the when you make it as a study. So you have the Ashtadasha Vidyasthanas, or the 18 seats of learning. I think that was also covered earlier in one of your podcasts with Hari, where the 4 Vedas, then the 6 Vedangas, then the 4 Upavedas, and the other 4 ancillary subjects such as the Itihasa, Purana, Agama and Darshana. These constitute the Ashtadasha Vidyasthanas. Now in that, the Vedangas, the 6 Vedangas, which is nothing but the you can say the organs of the Vedas, that is Vedanga. Anga. Yeah. Once you understand that, through which you may be able to understand the Vedas. So that is Shiksha, Vyakarana, Chandas, Nirukta, Jyotisha and Kalpa. Now each of these, for the Veda Purusha, we symbolize that with a particular organ. We say, for example, Jyotisha, we say it is the eyes of the Veda Purusha,
because about light.
It's about light, the astronomy and astrology that is there. So similarly you have, so in Kalpa is called as the hands of the Veda Purusha, because it is Vedas in action. Now there's sutra for it. Kalpa Sutras are there. 3 things constitute the Kalpa Sutras. One is the Shrauta Sutra, another is Grihya Sutra, and the third one is Dharma Sutra.
Okay.
Now what does the Dharma Sutra do? There is mentioning of dharma in the texts of the Vedas in several planes. And in order to understand the Vedas also, you need to understand what do they mean by dharma. Because you see the reference of dharma in several of the Vedas. So to understand that, when you see there is the Sutrakaras, in the Dharma Sutras, what they did is, they said these are all the parts in Rig Veda or Yajur Veda or Sama Veda or Atharvana Veda, where there is a reference to dharma and what does it mean, and what we need to understand in order to get there and understand what is the true purport of what is there in the Vedas. So those were there in the Dharma Sutras. So there were various Sutrakaras who wrote on Dharma Sutra, and then there were Smritis, on which also I think the audience already perhaps know what Smriti and Shruti is. So some of these Smritis as well as some of these Dharma Sutras mentioned about dharma in action. That is, what are the things that we need to do at an individual level, at a family level, at a society level, and at a national level, in order to ensure that life is led in a meaningful way, and the society is robust and peaceful. For that purpose, this in order to sustain that particular society or the nation or even that particular individual or the family, what are the principles that need to be achieved are all mentioned in the Dharmashastras. So these are I can say Dharmashastras. And who wrote the Dharmashastras? There have been various Dharmashastrakaras, starting from Manu, who wrote the Manusmriti. Then you have the Yajnavalkya Smriti. And of course, although Kautilya has written the Arthashastra, there is not much, I can say, difference in the content of either Arthashastra or Dharmashastra, but the treatment of subject changes a lot. Because in Arthashastra, the treatment of the subject is to ensure that the administration becomes even more capable for the king. Because many people think Arthashastra means it's only about money and economy. It is also about administration. It's also about holding that particular land, ruling it effectively. As a means of it, the economy will improve. That is the whole thing. So the treatment there is on a different plane, but there also we see lot of the aspects of Dharmashastras being mentioned. And you have the Apastamba Dharmashastra, Bauddhayana Dharma Sutra, so on and so forth. There are several of Dharmashastra who have written. In fact, if anybody reads P.V. Kane's History of Dharmashastra, the volume 1 of his work is completely dedicated to sources of Dharmashastra.
Oh, only the sources.
Only on the sources.
Wow.
Entire volume 1 is there. So he has gone by the chronological order from the earliest of the Dharmashastra to the latest.
It's and almost giving like a evidence or a pramana to what.
Correct.
Yeah.
And the latest Dharmashastra we see is Jagannatha, who stayed in the 18th century CE.
Okay.
So that is the last Dharmashastra that we see. And of course, all Dharmashastra have not written on the same subject. Although they cover Dharmashastra, some people have expertise on one particular subject, so they tend to write more. For example, Yajnavalkya Smriti says more on the Rajadharma and very less on some of the other Vyavaharas. Whereas if you take Jimut Vahana or Mitakshara and Vignaneshwara, who wrote the Mitakshara school of law or the Dayabhaga school of law, they have concentrated more on the property aspects in Vyavahara, some of these. So different Dharmashastra have concentrated on some of these.
Okay.
And the Dharmashastras include your Shodasha Samskaras.
Oh.
And it includes the ordeals that has to take place. It includes dispensation of justice and laws. And it includes your Tirthakshetras. And it includes discussions on some of the aspects of philosophy also.
Okay. So it's an integrated
thing.
Wow.
And anything in life or at materialistic level, whatever you would do, on every aspect, there is some light being thrown under the Dharmashastras. So it's an extremely vast subject. And that way the Dharmashastras, of course, therefore remain to be ever relevant.
So, I mean, we know all of the invasions and the coloniality that happened to India, right? The invasions happened in multiple levels. One is the Islamic invasions, and after that European invasions.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the timeline of this Dharmashastras being applied, or was it followed till then, or what was the timeline like?
We can say that, as I told you, the last Dharmashastra was in the 18th century.
Okay.
So almost until the 18th century, the Dharmashastras were being followed.
Okay.
Of course, what happens is when there was...
so that means even during when the Islamic invasions were happening, even then it was there?
It was there to an extent. I can say that when the ruling was of, say, the Islamic rulers, they brought in their laws. And they even changed some of the terminologies also. For example, I can give a illustration which everybody can understand. So when during Tipu's reign in Karnataka itself, he changed the very wordings of some of the revenue laws.
Okay.
From the Sanskrit terminologies, it were all changed to the Persian or Urdu terminologies.
For example?
Say, for example, now you have kata. Khata is, it's not a Sanskrit term which we never use. It was used by him to say an account. And then you have bin. You know, in most of the revenue records, you mention who is the holder of the land. You say Kashyap bin Narahari. That means son of.
Oh, okay.
So this is the same as Osama bin Laden. So bin is the son of. Qom being wife of. So many of that Akar Bandh.
It's still being used.
Even to this day, the revenue districts use it. This was changed during Tipu's regime. And so there were changes being made at a practical level, and laws were changed at that point of time. But however, I should say that there are some aspects on which the Dharmashastras continue to rule at all times, even now. For example, your succession laws on how you would get the property from your father or your mother, and could you bequeath the property or not, how should it go away? All of these were always governed under your personal laws.
Mm.
Because your holding of the property, holding of the family, your laws on marriages were all under your personal laws.
Mm.
So those who converted or those who were born in some other religion will of course continue with their personal laws.
Personal laws.
But otherwise, for all these subjects
Civil
on
matters.
adoption, maintenance, property, and marriages, and child and custody, all of these are generally governed under your personal laws.
Mm.
So even after India became independent, they wanted to make a common law for all the religions.
Mm.
That's why you have that uniform civil code, which
yeah.
was there in the directive principles of state policy in the constitution.
Mm.
What is directive principles? It is a guideline to the government saying that at this stage, when the constitution is being made, we cannot make this immediately applicable, but it is a guideline for you to ensure that you reach there and you get all the directive principles also made as a law and make it as a fundamental right. These are non-justiciable right, which should become a justiciable right. That is the meaning of directive principles of state policy. So under that itself, uniform civil code was there. So the then Jawaharlal Nehru government said that let us first ask the Hindus that you get your laws codified. If the Hindu laws are codified, the majorities are already codified, it is easier for me to go to the minorities and say, we will codify your laws also. Therefore, the codification of laws started. And you have the Hindu Marriages Act, the Hindu Succession Act, Hindu Adoption and Maintenance Act. All of these started from 1955, and between 55-56, all this got codified. Now, interestingly, the definition of Hindus under any of these laws, Hindu Marriage Act, Hindu Succession Act, includes Jains, Buddhists, Sikhs. All of these are included in your the definition of Hindus. For them, the same law applies. So for that, they took the Dharmashastras. They saw in what way the property is being devolved, etc., and they codified it. Of course, by codification, I can say more than 50 to 60% of the old Dharmashastras stopped the interplay and the new law came into picture. So almost until then, until 1955, to answer your question, Dharmashastras played its role even on these areas also.
Okay.
So until then it remained.
Okay. So until 1955.
Until 1955 on these areas. On various other areas, I can say until the British made laws. So the British government took its complete reign after the 1857 First War of Indian Independence. In 1858, you have the Queen's Proclamation. So the very first promise by the Queen in 1858 proclamation is that the British Crown will not interfere with the religion of India, of the people of India. That was because religion was one of the major factor for the outburst that took place in 1857, both for Hindus as well as Muslims. So the first statement there was that we will not interfere with your religion. Therefore, the personal laws continued. But on all other laws, for example, you have the Indian Contract Act, the Indian Penal Code, all of these laws that came in were codified and made applicable to us by the Britishers after 1858. That's why most of the statutes that we have today are of 1872, 1858, 1869, something like this, Evidence Act, things like that.
But these laws were already there. So some of it Britishers bought and some of it were already there.
Yeah, you can say that, as I told you, law relating to property, succession, adoption, maintenance, marriages continued under the Dharmashastras.
Okay.
The other ones, Britishers framed the law.
Yeah, because of that rising of 1857.
These were not touched. These subjects, personal subjects, were not touched. On general or secular subjects such as administration, contract, how the court system, the institution of courts, all of this they brought in their own method and they framed their laws after 1858.
Okay. So then I remember that in the recent years, I mean only last year it was still called as the Indian Penal Code.
Yeah.
Right? And then now they changed to Bharatiya
Nyaya Sanhita.
Nyaya Samhita, right?
Correct.
So, is there any difference between that and this, or it's the same thing, or just the name change?
There are some changes.
Okay.
And but I cannot say that there are radical changes from what it was. the Indian Penal Code, the way it stayed, and the new Bharatiya Nyaya Samhita, including the Indian Evidence Act, which is now called as the Sakshya Samhita, or even the CRPC, which is now called as the Nagarik Suraksha Samhita. The idea of changing it more was to wither away your colonial mindset under the laws. That appears to be the main theme of the government when they framed these laws. But if you look at the essence of what was punishable under IPC is even punishable now.
Now also.
The procedure that was there in the older laws, the procedure with minor amendments are there even now. So the one of the criticism to the new laws is that nothing much has changed. 90% has remained the same. Only because you wanted to change the name, you have made a new law is one of the things. But what many people may not understand is these laws may not be the procedure code, but the Evidence Act and the IPC, Indian Penal Code, the substance of these particular laws are timeless in nature.
Which is again based on Dharmashastra.
Yeah. So, of course, the Britishers did not borrow directly from Dharmashastra. They borrowed it from the Roman law. And historians will be better equipped than me to speak on how much was the influence of the Indian civilization on the Roman civilization and accordingly how the Roman laws were placed. Britishers, of course, owe their entire allegiance of their legal system to the Roman legal system, Roman law. Because even now, some of the legal terminologies we used are based on Latin terms and terminologies. So there is a direct influence of Roman law on the British-made laws. However, in spirit, if you see, in Dharmashastras, we have a chapter called as Vyavaharas.
Okay.
What does Vyavahara mean? The term Vyavahara comes from three root words called Vyavahara. Hara means taking away, dispelling. What are dispelling? Various doubts. Dispelling of various doubts is Vyavahara. Who does this? Dispelling of various doubts and seeing what is truth, what is not. It is the courts. So anything to do with transactions that can come to court or that needs to be validated in the court are the chapters on Vyavahara.
Okay.
This is what the Vyavahara chapter is all about. So all your the present law subjects that we have under the Dharmashastras was covered under the chapter of Vyavahara.
Okay.
Now under Vyavahara there were 18 titles of law are called as the Ashtadasya Vyavaharapada. Now some of it I will tell you what are those. So you have Bhukti, possession. Then you have Divya, that is ordeal. Then decision, decree, limitation, procedure on going before the court and procedure of pleadings. Those are there. Then Aswami Vikraya, sale of a particular property by a one person who is not an owner of the property. Then Sambhuya Samuttana, partnerships. Then you have Dattana Pakrama, that is resumption of gift. And then you have Sambit Vyatikrama, that is violation of compacts or breach of contract.
Okay.
And then you have Seema Vivada, which is boundary dispute. Then you have Steya, theft. Then you have Sahasa, which is rape. Then you have Vakparusha and Dandaparusha, that is hurting somebody by words is Vakparusha, which we now call defamation. And Dandaparusha is assault or battery,
physical
what
assault.
We call physical assault.
Okay.
That is there as Dandaparusha. So some of these, I'm not quoting all the 18.
Yeah.
So these are some of the 18 Vyavaharapadas that are there on the Dharmashastras.
Wow, this was written almost 3,000 to 5,000.
Much earlier. So
wow.
So you find the 18 Ashtadasha Vyavaharapadas in Manusmriti.
Yeah.
And then you find it in all subsequent texts, including in Kautilya's Arthashastra, you find some of these 18 with minor changes. So each of these Dharmashastrakaras, the Lord Digest and Compendium, whenever they prepared, called as Dharmashastras, they made their modification to the changing society as on that day.
That day, yeah.
So they made some of these changes and it remained relevant for, and the kingdom would say that we are going and following this particular Dharmashastra and continue that following of the Dharmashastras.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at these subjects that were there and see what it really spoke about, you will find that these have continued even to this day with change in form. The content has remained the same. So, for example, say in Arthashastra, there is a rule on pleading which says whenever a party approaches the court complaining something, he'll have to only speak about the material facts and not anything else, which is the same as what is there in Order 6 of CPC even today. And it says you will have to say against whom you are supposed to file a case, who is the plaintiff, who is the defendant, and what is the money that is to be recovered, what is the final prayer that you would want. All of these should be spoken, which is there even to this day. The change that I see is in evidence. Earlier, it was mostly oral evidences. Now, the major change that was made under the British made laws was the documentary evidence. At those days, the documentary evidences were quite less. So, they had to rely more on the oral evidences. If now also you come under the criminal law for adjudication of any disputes under the criminal law, documentary evidences play very less role. It is again the oral testimony of witnesses which comes. So, who is the best witness, what is primary and secondary evidences are all written under the Dharmashastras, which more or less in spirit has continued to remain even now. So, when you read these and you say that this was written, see, Kautilya's Arthashastra was written when? In 3rd or 4th century BC. And so, approximately 2300-400 years back, if you read these particular laws, and the kind of disputes that arose, one, you would know how much more advanced we were as a society at that point of time, because, for example, in Arthashastra, there are standards of weights and measures. So, when you see that, you will say, unless and until there was disputes and people trying to usurp something by making a false weight and doing something like this, nobody would make a law on it. Contemplate something which is not there today. So, you will know how forward the society was at that time. And number two, you will see that these were timeless in nature. It has continued for time immemorial. There are subjects which are not relevant today. For example, the law relating to faults, breach of faults, all of those are not relevant today. But I can say 80% of what was mentioned there in one or the other form has continued even now. Some of those timeless aspects have been mentioned in the chapters of Vyavahara.
Wow. I'm so stunned that at 3 to 4,000 years, what they had written is still relevant today, and we are still talking about it. Correct. That's the beauty of this whole culture, I think. The beauty of Sanatana Dharma itself is that this is the oldest civilization which still exists and which we are still talking about it using the latest mic and doing a podcast on it. That's amazing.
Correct.
So we can talk about you already mentioned that the things that were already there in Dharmashastras were still continued to be followed, or even today it is being followed. The base is still there, right? Is there something which was taken off in the constitution, which were removed, that this is not relevant? I mean, you already said which is not relevant, but there was something because of the invasion, because of the colonial mindset and all that. There were some things which must have been removed, right? Was there anything like that?
Okay, so I should say that when the constitution was being written, the reference to Dharmashastras is almost nil. The constitution was written by certain members who were of Constituent Assembly, members of the Constituent Assembly. The debates and discussions that took place for making or framing the constitution are available to us under the Constitution Assembly debates in about 5 or 6 big volumes of books. So once you read most of the discussions that has taken place, you hardly find any reference to Dharmashastras.
Okay.
Probably because the members were more in the mindset of taking the laws which were not only British, but they were influenced a lot by the Western ideologies. See, the main person who took the various constitutions, read it and framed as to what could come here was B.N. Rao, Benegal Narsingh Rao. Of course, they say Ambedkar, because Ambedkar was the head of the drafting
Draft
committee.
yeah.
As to what should be the content, there were committees for everything. For example, on the chapter on fundamental rights, there was a fundamental right committee. There was drafting committee. There was directive principal state policy committee. There was a committee on union and executive separation of powers. So like this, there were several committees. But the advisor to the Constituent Assembly was Benegal Narsingh Rao. So what he did is he toured the world, especially the Western world, and tried to take the constitutions of different countries and also study its working. Not only what they have written, but also how it has shaped during the course of years. Because generally law is made in vacuum. When you make the law, you don't know how it is going to turn out. It is only when the law is being executed and operated will we actually know what is being done by that particular law. So he studied the working. So the chapters on the fundamental rights were borrowed from the American Constitution, as also from the Irish Constitution. The directive principles of state policy is mostly from the Irish Constitution that we have taken. We have also studied the Australian Constitution, from there we have taken. So what they did is they studied various constitutions of the world and they took the best out of it, is what I can say. And the Indian Constitution is perhaps the lengthiest constitution or the longest constitution in the world.
Okay.
Nobody has this kind of lengthiest written constitution. It has its own pros and cons. But to answer your question on Dharmashastras, what was taken out, I should say nothing was taken in.
Okay.
So everything was taken afresh. But in spirit, I think we can now see many of the similarities between the two laws.
Okay.
It need not be constitution alone, it can be various laws. But the genesis of any of the constitutional principles, at least in the minds of the constitution makers, did not arise from the
Dharmashastras. Okay. But then you were saying till 1955 it was there. Then what was that? It was only the property laws and stuff like that?
Some of those laws.
Okay.
That was there. The Dharmashastras existed, but the makers never thought it fit that because recently also we got some of the writings of D.V. Gundappa. So he was not there in the Constituent Assembly debates, and of course it's a point of discussion on whether he should have been put in that committee or not. Anyway, he mentions in one of the pen portraits that he met one of the famous lawyers from Madras who was there in the Constituent Assembly. So he said, I have to make preparations for getting into the Constituent Assembly. I have to read Thomas, I have to read John Locke, I have to read what Rousseau said, plus I have to read various constitutions.
Because they were all trained in London.
Under that. And they said, I need to go through. So DVG heard and said, all right, you are reading all that. I'm not saying no, but what about Manusmriti? What about Apastamba? What about Yagnavalkya? Why have you not read that? He said, no, it's all age-old practices and traditions. Who will read all of those to see what our constitution should be? We are now in a different sphere. We are talking about justice, fairness, liberty, and what has Dharmashastras got to offer in that. So then DVG says that perhaps if he had read through, he would have at least known what existed at that point of time. So it was the mindset problem. Of course, we have not lost much, I should say, but because even under the present constitution, many of the principles which are very dear to our heart, including say your right to equality or some of the 7 freedoms, your right to life and liberty, were not very alien to us under the Dharmashastras. We knew it. Having known something, if you want to reinvent yourself once again, starting from scratch, you can do it. But the wholesome picture that was always available, to that extent, I should say, they failed in inculcating it in the constitution.
Meaning, it was like it was known to us, but it was taken away and said that this is better than that, which is already there. Right? It was like packaging it in a different way and selling it to us and saying that we gave it to you. Is that?
No, I mean, I'm not saying they knew what it is. I'm saying you have realized something already, but you think it is an age-old principle and you put it to the garbage. And then you are trying to see some of the principles as something which the Indian mind never knew. But if you had a look at it, we always knew
We
that,
always
and
knew it.
maybe it was framed better, is what I feel.
Yeah, that's like some. I mean, we can end this episode here, but it was like this. There is this meme going on in the internet about Germans using bale ele, which is
Yeah,
plantain leaf, and they are selling it as this is the most sustainable
correct,
way of eating.
correct.
Boss, we were eating in it from ages. So don't give that to us. So it's almost like that. Is that true?
Yeah, sort of. You can say that's how it is.
Okay. Okay, let's move on to the next segment once again.
Yeah.
Thank you.